Good day, class. You're welcome to another edition of our physics lessons. Today we'll be looking at emission and photoelectric effect. Emission and photoelectric effect. So, firstly, we want to look at emission. What is emission? Emission is the act of sending gas, heat, light out into the air. It's a process of sending gas, heat, or light into the air. That is emission. So it can be as a result of heat, energy from another particle, or as a result of a field, or as a result of light. So this emission can be caused as a result of heat, or this emission can be caused as a result of energy effect from another particle, and also can be caused as a result of a field, influence of a field, or as a result of light falling on a particle. So now with that case, we are going to talk about electron emission. Electron emission is the process when an electron escapes from a metal surface. Electron emission is a process whereby electrons escape from the metal surface. So under this electron emission, we are going to be looking at photoelectric effect. What is photoelectric effect? What is photoelectric effect? Now, under methods of electron emission, we can have photoelectric effect is one of the methods of electron emission. Mind you, we said electron emission is a process when an electron escapes from a metal surface. So now, one of the process of electrons escaping from a metal surface, electrons escaping from metal surface is photoelectric effect. Among others, we have thermionic emission, we have secondary emission, feed emission, and photoelectric effect. All these are processes whereby electrons are emitted from a surface of a material. Then we have the thermionic emission, which is as a result of heat. This is when electrons gain enough energy to escape as a result of heat. Then secondary emission, this is when electrons gain enough energy by the transfer from another particle. They gain energy by the transfer from another particle and they escape. Alright, then feed emission. This is when electrons gain, the electrons are able to escape from the surface of a material by electric field pull. When there is a field pull on it, so it gains and is able to escape. That one we call it feed emission. So we have the feed emission, which is a strong external electric field pulling an electrons from a material. When a strong external electric field pulls an electron from a material surface, we call that feed emission. We also have the photoelectric effect. Photoelectric effect is when incident light or white light or bright light or electromagnetic radiation shines on the material and causes electrons to escape. We call that photoelectric effect. So these are four major ways whereby electrons are emitted from a metal surface. Four major ways which electrons are emitted from a metal surface. Alright, so we have been able to look at the thermionic emission, the secondary emission, field emission, and photoelectric effect. Alright, so light can give electrons extra kinetic energy, causing them to escape. That is what we call photoelectric effect. When light give electrons extra kinetic energy to escape, we call it photoelectric effect. Alright, so now we'll also want to explain the thermionic emission. Thermionic emission, as we know, is the process of emitting an electron when heat is applied on it. When heat is applied on it, the process whereby electrons are emitted is what we call the thermionic emission. What are the applications of thermionic emission? We have number one, diode valve. We also have X-ray tube. We have cathode ray tubes. All these are applications of thermionic emission. We have the diode valve, X-ray tube, cathode ray tube, e.g. your television. So these are examples or applications of thermionic emission. These are applications of thermionic emission. So let's explain what the diode valve is. What is a diode valve? A diode valve is a special kind of electrical resistant device which allows current to flow in one direction and can be used as a rectifier. So a diode valve is a special kind of electrical resistant device which allows current to flow in one direction and can be used as a rectifier. So a diode valve is one of those devices that do not obey Ohm's law. Another device we have is that do not obey Ohm's law. We have the diode valve, and we also have semiconductors. They do not obey Ohm's law. All right. So now we are going to also be talking about the photoelectric effect. Photoelectric effect. So we have diode valve, and we also have the transistors. They do not obey Ohm's law. So we'll be looking at photoelectric effect. So what is photoelectric effect? Photoelectric effect is the process whereby electrons are emitted from a metal plate when it is exposed to ultraviolet light. So the process whereby electrons are emitted from a metal surface when it is exposed to ultraviolet light is what we call photoelectric effect. So it's what we call the photoelectric effect. So the effect is often defined as the ejection of electrons from a metal plate when light falls on it. So ejection of electrons from a metal plate when light falls on it is what we call the photoelectric effect. So if you look at it closely, you will see that basically the photoelectric effect is the ejection of electrons from a metal by shining light on it. So shining light on it, you can see clearly that when light shines or falls on the metal surface, electrons are emitted. Electrons are emitted. So that is how it is. So application of photoelectric effect. So what are the applications of photoelectric effect? So application of photoelectric effect brought about what we call the photocells or electric eyes or door openers. These are the event of photoelectric effect. So it brought about what we call the photocell, right? So the photoelectric effect also brought about what we call light meters used in photography. All right, light meters used in photography. We also brought about which we call photometers. It also brought about what we call the solar panels, and we also have photostatic copying, which we use in our photocopiers. Hence, we look at the various applications of photoelectric effect as that. So these are some of the events of photoelectric effect. So we want to now study closely what the applications of photoelectric effect are. One, photocell. Photocell is the most important application. It is mostly commonly found in solar panels. It works on the basic principle of light striking the cathode, which causes the emission of electrons, which in turn produces current. So another thing we'll be looking at here is the photomultiplier tube. It makes use of the photoelectric effect to convert light intensity into electric current. Photomultiplier tube is another application of photoelectric effect. Its own is that it converts light intensity into electric current. So it uses the principle or the effect of light, the electric to convert light intensity into electric current. So we also have a photocopiers, photostatic light. As a result of photoelectric effect, photostatic lights are able to be used in photocopiers, light meters, photodiodes, and also phototransistors. All right. So these are what the photoelectric effects can be used. We have the photometer, which is the light meter, the photocopiers, we have photodiodes, and also phototransistors. All right. So another application of photoelectric effect is in scintillators. A scintillator is a device that emits light when it attracts radiations from either source in the lab or in cosmic sources. So a scintillator is that device that emits light when it attracts radiations. So photoelectric effect helps is also used in scintillators. It's also used in scintillators. So now we have a photocell, a photoelectric cell. A photoelectric cell, also called a phototube or electric tube or electric eye, is an electronic device that is sensitive to incident radiations, especially visible light. Alright, so photoelectric cells are sensitive to incident radiations, that's especially visible light, which is used to generate or control an output of electric current. So that's what a photoelectric cells are. So what photocells, how does photocells or photoelectric cells, how do they work? So they work on the principle that electrons leave the metal surface whenever photons or sufficient energy strike the surface. So whenever sufficient energy strike the surface, photons or electrons leave the metal surface whenever photons strike the surface. So what are now the uses of these photocells? What are the uses? We have seen applications. So what are the uses of these photocells? So an application of photoelectric effect is a photocell, while the uses of now the photocells, what are they? One, to open or close door automatically. So some of these uses, you can see it in opening and closing door automatically. So it can also be used in automatic switching devices. Automatic switching devices. So you can have it in some of your malls, some of your shops, big shops, banks. When you enter, by the time you are getting close to the bank, the door opens on its own. It's as a result of the photocell. So it also automatically is used in automatic switching devices. So that is where a photocell can also be used. So in television cameras, in television sets, your photocells can also be used. Okay, so it can also be used. Your photocells can also be used. Okay, so and also as a burglar alarm, a photocell can be used as a burglar alarm. So when there is an emergency, the photocell is able to trigger the alarm to start, to come up, right? So also it can also be used as a safety device in paper mill. So photocell can also be used as a safety device in paper mill. So these are some of the uses of the photocell. So now we want to look at the various differences between a photoelectric emission and thermionic emission. What are the differences? So in photoelectric emission, electrons are released in the presence of light, alright? While in thermionic emission, electrons are released in the presence of heat. So the photoelectric effect, electrons are released in the presence of light. Thermionic emission, electrons are released in the presence of heat. Another difference is that electrons are released at threshold frequency. In photoelectric effect, electrons are released at threshold frequency, while in thermionic emission, electrons are released at particular temperature. So at a particular temperature, electrons are released in thermionic emission, while in photoelectric emission, electrons are released at threshold frequency. So those are the basic differences between a photoelectric effect and a thermionic emission. So now we want to look at the similarities that occur between both of them. So similarities, they are both surface phenomenon. Alright, they always happen, they both happen at the surface. So the similarity of photoelectric effect and thermionic emission is that they are both surface phenomenon. Another similarity is that electrons are released in both cases. Another similarity that happens is that energy is released. Alright, so in the case of photoelectric emission and thermionic emission, energy is released. That brings us to what we call the threshold frequency. Now, not in all frequencies that electrons are released. Electrons are released at a particular frequency. So there must be a frequency before the electrons are being released from the surface of a material. So that frequency that must be met before electrons are being released is what we call the threshold frequency. So what is threshold frequency? Threshold frequency is the frequency which is just sufficient to liberate electrons from the surface of a metal when light falls on it. So the frequency that is just sufficient to liberate electrons from the surface of a metal when light falls on it is what we call the threshold frequency. So it is represented as F0. Alright, this frequency gives rise to what is called the work function. So the little or the minimum amount of frequency required for an electron to be released from the surface of the material is what we call the threshold frequency. Alright, and it is denoted by F. So now let us look at work function. What is work function? What is work function? Work function is the minimum energy required to liberate an electron from the surface of a material. So the minimum energy required to liberate an electron from the surface of a material is what we call the work function. Alright, so the work function is the minimum energy required to liberate an electron from the surface of a material. So it is denoted with W0. So that is what it is denoted with. And W0 equals to HF0, where W stands for work and work is same as energy. So since it's the minimum energy, it can also be equated to the Planck's constant multiplied by the minimum frequency, which is to inform us that the work function is being gotten from the threshold frequency. So the minimum energy required for an electron to be liberated from the surface of the material is what we are calling the work function. So we'll look at what threshold frequency is. What is threshold frequency? Threshold frequency, again, in photoelectric effect, is the minimum frequency. So since we have to use work function in terms of threshold frequency, that is to say, we cannot take threshold frequency away from work function. And threshold frequency in photoelectric effect is the minimum frequency of electromagnetic radiation, which is just required for the phenomenon of photoelectric emission. So the minimum energy that is just required to create the phenomenon of photoelectric emission is what we are calling the threshold frequency. So that minimum frequency is called the threshold frequency, while the minimum energy is what we call the work function. So as you can see in the diagram, so while the photons are incidented on the metal surface, you can see that the more the frequency at which they fall on the metal surface, the more the possibility of electrons to be emitted. So as more light falls and the frequency increases, the ammeter will be increasing. The ammeter reading keep increasing, and when less light falls, the ammeter reading goes back. That's to tell you that when electrons are being released from the surface of the material, all right, it depends on the quality of light and also depends on the frequency. All right, so a low intensity light will actually not give any emission. A low intensity light will actually not give any emission. All right, and so a low intensity light will not give any emission. So as the intensity of the light is very low, then it has to take a longer time before electrons are emitted. So a low intensity light will actually have to take a longer time. All right, but when the intensity is very high, the intensity of the light is very high, then there is all tendency for the electrons to be emitted faster or on time. Right, so according to classical theory, if the incident light is feeble, that's low intensity, then the surface will have to be exposed for some time before it emits electron. So it has to be exposed for some time before it emits electron. Okay, like as we can see, so when if we are having red light actually do not give any emission. So no electrons is emitted when the light is red. If you are using a red light, all right, if a red light falls on the metal surface, no emission is emitted. While when a green light falls on a metal surface, all right, electrons are emitted. Electrons are emitted at a maximum velocity of 2.96 times 10 raised to power 5 meters per second. While when blue light falls on a metal surface, you can see that the speed is higher. So electrons are emitted at 6.22 times 10 raised to power 5 meters per second. So this is how we can be able to compare within the different kinds of light. So the blue light gives better emission than the red light, which gives no emission. Alright, so this is all we have for this class, and want to appreciate your effort. Thank you very much. So as we have said before, subscribe to our channel, and you have to see the calculation that follows this particular video in the next series. So you have to look at the calculations that follow this video that follows this topic in the next video. So you see a lot of calculations that will be coming up in the next video. So click subscribe to get more of our channels and see all that has to do with that in this video. Thank you and have a nice day.